Well, again, good morning to everybody, and welcome to this first session of our 2014 AgrAbility Virtual National Training Workshop. We have 6 webinars lined up for you over the next 3 days, so we hope that you'll be able to participate as much as possible in those. And if you're not able to participate in all of them, then we will be recording them and archiving them on our website. My name is Paul Jones. I manage the National AgrAbility Project here at Purdue University. And before we start with our presentation from Deborah Reed, I have just a couple of quick webinar instructions for you, especially for those that have not participated in our webinars before. We're not using a phone connection, so you do need to use speakers or headphones. If you want to have check your sound in any way, you can use the meeting menu on the top left of your screen and go through the audio setup wizard if you're having any audio issues. If you have any questions about the presentation, please go ahead and type those in the chat window and hit the return icon there. Looks like a little bubble, and we will be collecting those and answering those at the end of the session today. Also, if you have a web microphone, we will try to enable that if you would like to ask your question verbally during the question and answer session at the end. All you need to do is use the raise hand icon that's at the top of your screen during that question and answer period, and we will attempt to activate your microphone to ask your question. We have 4 very quick survey questions at the end of the session, so please stick around and give us some feedback in terms of your experience. Again, we are archiving these sessions, and you can go ahead and click that link on your site or on your screen and bookmark that page if you'd like to return to that later. If you're having any problems with technical issues, please try to use the chat window first. If you're having difficulty even using the chat window, then you can feel free to email agrability@agrability.org, and we'll be monitoring that email account during the presentation today. Some issues that we've had in the past: if you're having any echo, that may mean that you're logged in twice. I saw that a couple people look like they're possibly logged in more than once. So if you're getting some echo, you might make sure you're not logged in more than one time. If for any reason our presenter is disconnected, please just hang on and we will try to reconnect as quickly as possible. And if you are disconnected for some reason as a participant, please just log in again. For those that are not familiar with AgrAbility, the program is sponsored by the USDA and focuses on issues of disability in agriculture. Every AgrAbility project is a partnership between a land-grant university and at least one nonprofit disability organization, and there are currently 20 funded projects around the country. The national project, as I mentioned, is headquartered here at Purdue University, and our partners on the national grant include Goodwill of the Finger Lakes, the Arthritis Foundation here in Indiana at the Heartland region, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and Colorado State University. If you'd like to know if your state has an AgrAbility project or like any more information about AgrAbility, including some archived webinars, feel free to check the www.org website. This time, I'd like to welcome our presenter, Dr. Deborah Reed from University of Kentucky. I'm going to turn things over to her, and then I will return later for the question and answer period.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and I hope if you have that little camera, you can see me waving to you from not so sunny Kentucky today. I appreciate being asked to do this. I've never done this via webinar. It's always been in person, so we'll try to make a few adaptations as we go along. But I'm known as an ag nurse. There are about 5 or 6 of us across the nation, and my specialty is gerontology. So hence we're going to talk about aging farmers at this point in time. And I need to advance this. And Okay, my technical expert is here. Okay, there we go. So we have a few objectives today. First of all, just to kind of provide you with some information on the health and work environment of aging farmers, and those start pretty young. I'm calling it below the age of 50. Discuss the interface between aging and farm work, maybe some strategies to help you as you're in the field to assess the risk of these farmers, and discuss strategies to restructure their behavior and work, which some people think they can't do, but amazingly enough, farmers are pretty pliable if you share with them information that they really find useful. I have a rather robust package of funding to help me put together things like this. I recently completed a very large study of about 1,500 farmers over the age of 50. It included farm couples because farming is usually a family organization thing. So I had a NIOSH grant for that. Then I spent a couple of years going around the nation just talking to older farmers and their family members about what would make you change your behavior and what do you see as your own risk in farming. And I'm able to spread that information through another project called Nurse App, which is funded through our Southeast Center for Ag, Safety, and Health through NIOSH. I don't have any financial interest in this, but I do have a lot of personal interest. So I don't know if I should disclaim that or not, but all my family, with the exception of me, are farmers. So I do have a foot on the farm pretty much at all times. Farming is the most rapidly aging workforce in the United States. It's now, I think the average is 58.3 actually, and according to the 2012 census. But the average age of the U.S. workforce is 42. So all the generic things that we see in terms of remedies and solutions for the major workforce really don't resonate too well with people as they begin to hit that later midlife. The other thing is farmers don't retire. There's no standard retirement age or performance evaluation criteria or anything like that. And farmers tell me, a lot of them say, we work till we drop. And they work because actually they like it. It's much more for that than it is for financial reasons. The other thing that kind of complicates our work is that over half of all farmers hold an off-farm job. And this I'll show you is even true for older farmers. So on the 2012 census, we found out now that women farmers are primary operators on 14% of all farms. They're listed as second operators on 67% of farms now. That change really occurred with the last census when the spouses were included much more than they had been in the past. But they do a lot of real physical farm work. That's my sister up there in the top photo. The other thing that complicates this is the percent of operators that are 65 and older. Right now it's 33.25%. That's a 7% increase since the last census. And at the last census there had been a 20% increase from that previous one. So you can see how that pattern just continues on. So in our study of Kentucky and South Carolina farmers that I mentioned earlier, for that big R01 grant, we found out 44% of those also held an off-farm job. Now, these were farmers aged 50 and over. They averaged 34 hours a week on their off-farm job, which is, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, a full-time job. So basically, they were doing 2 full-time jobs. They did it for a variety of reasons. One was financial, and some of the farmers actually said it is to support my habit, not meaning a drug habit, but meaning essential to support their farm operation. As you know, sometimes farm operations operate at a loss, and so this was their cushion, if you will. They also had an interesting comment where they felt farm work reduced their overall stress, and it actually relaxed them from their off-farm job strain. Perhaps because they had more control, perhaps it's because this is a job they really like to do. And as they retired from their off-farm jobs, they tended to increase their farm work up to a very advanced age. My little cursor will not stay where I'm putting it there. So when an older farmer claims to be retired, and this is what you hear a lot of times, don't assume that dictionary meaning applies. They are not really retired. There was a study done about 10 years ago that showed that principal farm operators who reported they are retired still average 913 hours of work on the farm. To me, that is not being retired. That is doing a lot of work. But the farmers tell me it's not work if you enjoy what you're doing. So they kind of process this in a different way than what we do. The other thing is if they no longer have their farm life, it's a separation from their very essence of being. Farmers are defined by the work they do. And it really is a psychological issue. In our study, we included some focus groups of farmers over the age of 55 and looked at the average hours that they worked. So, of course, this is only 43 farmers, but these were pulled from the larger study of nearly 1,500. So if you look over on the left-hand column by the age group, it's advancing age. And if you kind of look at if they were full-time or part-time, you can see that. But notice on that right-hand column, the younger ones, the 56 to 59-year-olds, were averaging 67 hours a week working on the farm. And that goes down to 12 in the 80 to 83 group, but that's a lot of hours for somebody who's reporting farm work at those ages. Now, if we look at the ones who actually said they were retired completely, here's what you found from that previous chart. So the 65-year-old farmer who said, I'm retired, was actually working 40 hours a week on the farm. So no retirement there. And that declines as age increases. We had some people that didn't answer, but the 83-year-old just said, I work full-time on the farm, even though he said he's retired. So you have to be very careful when you're doing your histories about what is it they really mean when they say they're retired. So a good follow-up question is to just say, well, tell me what you did on the farm last week. And from there, you'll find out that, no, they're really not retired at all. So this is really personal for me. This is my sister, and she suffered right just below the knee amputation due to a farm incident that she had with a riding lawnmower mowing the right-of-way. And in talking with her about her follow-up care, she was very bitter. And she said, my doctor, after I cut my leg off, he said to sell the farm and retire. Now, what did we just say? This is the essence of their being. So she was very mad. She said, I'm not going to sell what we worked so hard for. This is what I do. This is who I am. I'll find a way to do it. I have to. Now, folks, this is your punchline for AgrAbility, because this is exactly what you do. You help them find a way to do it. My job is to help you understand as they age, maybe some adjustments that you can make in the way you work with your clients and some other things maybe you hadn't thought about. So my sister turned 78 yesterday. She is still farming. They're getting ready to go out and castrate 60-something head of cattle on Friday. So it really is her essence of being. They don't do this because they need the finances. They do this because they love it, she and her husband. All right, so here's a little slide that usually makes people go, oh, no. So listen up, find your age group in there, and I'm going to tell you from a health perspective, from a physiology perspective, what is happening to us from the day we are born, we age. So here's what happens. In your mid-20s, you reach your maximum respiratory capacity. You can go longer, talk faster, run higher, run faster, jump higher, and everything else in your 20s because your lungs are at their peak. After that, it's pretty much downhill. Now, if you're a smoker, it goes downhill at a double time. But this is a normal thing. Presbyopia, that's a nice word for what I call long arm syndrome that happens when you're in your 40s. Physically, what happens is the lens of your eyes begin to yellow and flatten some. So if you've seen people trying to read things like restaurant menus and they're holding it at arm's length, that's presbyopia. So in your 40s, that's a natural occurrence. By the time you're in your 50s, you have what I call the snap, crackle, and pop syndrome. Your joints begin to lose a little bit of that nice WD-40 they have in there between the bones, and the collagen begins to compress a little bit, so it actually can get as bad as bone on bone, but that's abnormal. But the joints, when you get up out of bed, you go, and you have to sit there and you have to stretch a little bit. So things in the bedroom, the noises can change from to as you're beginning to try to get out of bed. So snap, crackle, and pop when you're in your 50s. By the time isn't this depressing? By the time you're in your 60s, it'll get better, I promise. By the time you're in your 60s, you can have a new game to play with your grandchildren, and it's called Connect the Dots, because your skin begins to develop these little dots on them, these little brown freckle things that you didn't have before. That's due to sun, and we are all out in the sun, and particularly farmers, and some of their skin changes can be even worse. So that is normal. You also begin to lose a little bit of that fatty layer just underneath the skin. So you can actually tint up the skin at times. So those kind of things happen. By the time you're in your 70s, when you reach for things, you may not feel them. That's because the little nerve endings in the ends of your fingers and toes begin to decrease. So you have decreased distal sensation. If you are diabetic, that probably happens at an even younger age because diabetes takes a real toll on fingers and toes. But think about that if you're farming and what that might mean to you. If you're trying to pick up a wrench or a little nut or a bolt, to do some repair work, and you can't feel those things like you used to, it becomes much more difficult to do your work. And by the time you're in your 80s, you develop the grandma syndrome. The grandma syndrome is you need a shawl even when it's 90 degrees. You really don't have good temperature tolerance. Your window of being comfortable becomes around 75 to 80 degrees, and anything different from that, you're cold, or you don't adapt to it. So hypo and hyperthermia both is a very real problem with people in their 80s and above. Now, these are, to a degree, normal changes as we age. There is no magic formula, despite what you will see on those TV channels that try to sell you everything. This is going to happen to you. So, now you can be prepared for what's coming, or if you're already there, at least you can explain it. So that's the grown slide. Now, having said this, we're going to apply this to the farm community. The other thing that happens, now that we understand that normal process, is as age advances, what happens is we have prolonged recovery times. What used to take us 2 weeks to get over may take us a month to get over now. Respiratory infections will take longer. Broken bones will take longer. Anything is going to take longer. It's just a natural process. How does that impact work? The work still needs to be done in the same amount of time. So they're going to try to work through the pain or work through the respiratory problems or whatever they're having. The other thing is as age advances, both morbidity and mortality, or the things that cause us to die, increase. So again, if you think about it, kind of like your resistance is down as you begin to age. And then things don't happen one at a time. And that's where the real kicker comes in, is because you don't just get hypertension or diabetes, you may get both things at once. And if you get both things at once, there's a synergistic effect. So it's a 1 + 1 = 4 in this case. Older farmers are also at risk, and we know they're already at very high risk for injury anyway, but because their reflexes begin to slow. Remember the snap, crackle, pop syndrome? Maybe you just can't move as fast because it hurts and the joints are stiff. The physical wasting of the muscles occurs. Even if you are out all day doing farm work, you're still going to get the atrophy of the muscles as you age. Arthritis, you folks in AgrAbility do a great job with that already. I don't need to say much about it. The accelerated hearing loss. Hearing loss actually is documented in farm teens. Now, it's cumulative across the lifespan, so it starts early and it only gets worse. So that's something, as you're seeing your clients, you might even want to talk about in a proactive manner to keep them from having worse hearing loss than they already have. Cataracts. Farmers are second only to commercial fishermen in the prevalence of cataracts because most farmers don't wear sunglasses. And they think, those baseball caps are going to protect them, and it does to some extent, but not the way they should. So they're out there in that sun all the time. And farmers have a very high prevalence of skin cancer. Basal cell skin cancers, which aren't horrible if you get them taken care of in time, but they also have a very high prevalence of melanoma, which of course is a killer. In our study of the about 1,492 farmers that I told you about earlier, we asked them to self-report their health conditions, and we gave them a list of about 25 of those. So over half of them reported arthritis and hypertension. That doesn't surprise us, it's just a documentation of that. But a third of them also had severe back problems, severe enough that it limited their farm work. Only 26%, though, reported that they had hearing loss. Now, this was a telephone survey, and we think they really didn't hear that question. But we know that many more than 26% have hearing loss. I think if we had asked their spouses, that would have probably been up there in the 80s, but we asked the farmers themselves. And about a quarter of them reported visual deficits not corrected by glasses or any other corrective lenses. So if you think about these things and think about the work that these farmers are doing, they're working with a lot of disabilities. And maybe you don't even, that's not the reason they were referred to you. But while you're out there talking with them and assessing what they're doing, watch for these things now that you know the prevalence of them. They also take prescription medications on a daily basis. 4 out of 5 of them were taking prescription meds. And on preventive measures, a third of them didn't know about their tetanus immunization status. Now, I know, tetanus is a very rare thing, but it has an extremely high mortality rate. So even though you're not healthcare providers necessarily, it's a nice thing to drop in the conversation to say, now you might want to talk to your doctor about your tetanus shot and make sure that's up to date. I'm more concerned about the prescription medications, though, because prescription medicines, what do they have on the sides of those labels, which, if you have a visual deficit, you can't read it anyway, but what do they say? Don't use this medication when you're operating machinery. This medication may cause you to be sleepy or dizzy or poor balance, and what do farmers do? They climb, they have to be alert. So all of these things are very potentially dangerous. So they need to have all of their providers understand the medications they're on. We also asked the farmers about preventive care because with a public health background, I'm very much into let's prevent it. It's a lot better than having to deal with it after you get it. And so if you look at the bottom, they're doing really good at getting their blood pressure checked. And remember, over half of them had diagnosed hypertension. But now the blood pressure check in the last year was what this is. It could mean that you went to Walmart and stuck your arm in one of those machines one time. So we can't get too excited about that. But these are things that they at least had an awareness of. They get their cholesterol checked pretty well. Actually, I was surprised that over 70% reported having a complete physical in the last year. Now, this changed a little bit, though. Those under 65 without Medicare, their percentages look quite different than the ones over 65. So once Medicare kicked in, people were much more likely to have these. But on the other hand, they're pathetic about getting flu shots. And I tried to explain, if you get the flu, you can't work those cattle and be out in the pig barn. You're going to be in the bed taking care of yourself. So we need to kind of have those kind of conversations with them. Mammograms and prostate exams, they were doing probably a little bit better than the general public. So that was encouraging. And so when you're thinking about older farmers and people say they're resistant to things, I think this slide sort of disproves that. They're not all that resistant. If they know about these things, they're generally getting them done. So maybe just encouraging in an appropriate manner is what we need to do for all aspects of what we're trying to do with our clients when we're talking with them, whether it be changes on the farm or changes in things like this having to do with their health. Now this slide is one that usually takes people's breath away, so I want to dwell on this just a little bit. Farmers do have one of the highest suicide rates of any occupation. It's really surprising to people when I put this up, because even the farmers, because they say, well, I like what I do, I enjoy my work, why would this happen? And it does peak at the oldest ages, which is in the general public, that's the way it does too, and males are at higher risk than females. Again, the same as the general population. But think, and you're looking at these little slides, back here on the back of this one, it actually, through that gate, it says farm for sale. Now, this was close to me, and I know this farm had been in the family for over 100 years. And all of a sudden, what's been in your family over 100 years is lost for some reason. The kids don't want it, or got into financial trouble or whatever. So you're losing your heritage and your roots. Maybe it's things like old tractors and such that, you look out and here's everything that you've worked for, and you try to keep your farm looking nice, and it's going downhill because you physically can't do that anymore. Those are just some of the reasons that might have to do with this depression and suicide. But I think the next slide is going to scare you. It's a little fuzzy, and I apologize for that, but this is work done by my colleagues, Dr. Steve Browning and faculty here at the UK, published back in 2008. And they looked at death certificates for Kentucky, North Carolina, and South Carolina. These are white males. There weren't enough in the other categories to really lend itself to a meaningful analysis. But in epidemiology, this is what we call an epic curve, or an epidemic curve, this J curve right here. This is the number of white male farmers who commit suicide compared to the general total white population. So if you look at this, here's the white population, white male population in those 3 states, and it's going up, and I said it would go up anyway, but for farmers it just exponentially increases. Why? Maybe some of those reasons we just talked about in the last slide. I have an unfounded anecdotal hunch, take it as you will, that a lot of the tractor rollover deaths could possibly be what I call hidden suicides or unintentional suicides, because farmers have told me they would much rather die on their tractors. They would rather, to use their words, rust out than rest out. Their meaning of work, and I think encapsulated that on the last slide, when you sit still, you die, is what they say. So they're not going to sit still. I can't think of a time I wouldn't be raising cows unless I was dead or disabled. They are going to do this. So us telling them not to do it is ridiculous. We lose all our credibility, and they dismiss us, just like my sister dismissed the healthcare providers. Actually, we asked them on that big study, how would they best define good health? And they were defining good health. We gave them these list of things on the left-hand column, which are kind of abbreviated versions in the gerontology literature as to how older people will define good health. But look at this. Across the middle of this slide, health is the ability to work, pretty much 40% across the board, and it increases as they age. So for older people, work becomes even more meaningful. And it's not the amount of work or the amount of financial return they get from the work. It's just to be able to contribute meaningfully to the work. Now, we do know that the injury rate of farmers overall is 3 times higher than all other occupations. We know that. Here's the thing, though, you might not know. Older farmers have less non-fatal injuries than young farmers. They've adapted through the years. They have some wisdom, some accumulated knowledge that helps them avoid some of these things the younger ones don't have the experience to avoid. But when they are injured, their fatality rate is more than 2.5 times greater than those younger farmers. And they're much more likely to have longer hospitalizations, and translates into more expensive hospitalizations, of course, and worse recovery. So for us, when we go out and we're doing assessments, and I'm a nurse, so I'm coming from that perspective, you kind of need to do just kind of a little quick vision and hearing thing. And I don't mean put up an eye chart or take an audiogram out there. I'm talking, can they see what you're handing them to read? Do you have to raise your voice to be heard? Because if you have to raise your voice to be heard and you're 36 inches away from them, there's a hearing loss. How's their balance? How's their reaction time? How's their range of motion? Farming entails a lot of bending and twisting and things like that. So when you're thinking about adaptations out there, you have to think about all of these things. So here's a little thing I saw. I was at the ATM the other day, and an elderly lady approached and asked me to help check her balance. So I pushed her. I do not think this is what we want to do to our farmers. We do need to check their balance, but there's an easier way to do it, and it's kind of fun. This is usually the interactive part where I have someone from the audience come up, and I have them do the Flamingo Stance. And you know what the Flamingo Stance is. It's standing on one leg. But this is an easy test that you can do with your folks as you go out there. Now, this is provided they have 2 legs. You can't do this with my sister who only has 1. I'm aware of that. But if you can just get the person to try to balance, stand very close to them while you're doing this, or have them within arm's reach of something they can stabilize themselves. But just have their arms in three different poses here as you go through this. And this will show them if they can balance or not. So you're not preaching to them. Their body's going to be their own witness. The other thing you can do for reaction time is to just take a simple ruler, and you have their hands placed about 6 inches apart or so, and you start with this ruler above their hands, and you drop the ruler, and while you're talking with them, and if they can catch that ruler, their reaction time is pretty decent. There's actually a conversion for the reaction time at this website that you can find. So there are lots of little things. These are just 2 examples of things you can find on the web that are easy, and they're kind of fun for the people when you go out there. Everybody winds up laughing at these, really. So it sort of is a relaxing way to do an assessment without the use of a lot of fancy tools. In our safety strategies for older farmers, where I went around the country for a couple of years and talked with older farmers and with their family members, usually spouses or their adult children. And we did these in 2 separate focus groups, of course, because we didn't want to get into arguments, and we wanted honest perspectives. We asked them what they perceived as hazards for a risk for injury. The older farmers, if you'll notice, 3 of those 4 things that they listed are extrinsic to themselves. We might, get hurt on the equipment. We might not be able to dodge the cattle. Using things like chainsaws, that gets away from us like it didn't used to, but it does now. And we have a lot more stress than we used to. The family members, though, if you look at those things, other than driving equipment on the highway, it was all intrinsic things. They were worried about actually more the health status and the effects that was going to have on the older farmer. They thought this would be the way they would get hurt or injured. Their balance, their vision, all the things we just talked about, working long hours because they become fatigued more quickly, working alone. What happens to Dad when he's down in the lower 40 and there's no way to talk to him and I have to go check on him? But here's the common denominator here, is stress. What did we say earlier? This depression thing. Stress can lead to depression. So if you're talking to the farmers and the family members, you can see where the clash in communication is going to come because they have different perspectives on things. This is the common ground to begin the conversation. So that can really help you if you need to deal with more other things as you go along and begin to build that rapport that you can talk about. But you might have the common conversation about the stress. So what kind of things did those farmers that we talked about do? I mean, what are they doing? How are they changing their work to make it easier on them? Increasing use of four-wheelers and particularly these UTVs, utility vehicles, which have their own sets of risk, I might add. UTVs are rapidly becoming a greater threat among farmers for injury than are the four-wheelers because so many people are using them. They're using it and they get the center of gravity off. It's kind of all the things that the ATVs used to have. They also used a lot more communication devices, even to the point of walkie-talkie things for where cell phones wouldn't reach, or just making a plan and communicating that among each other. I should be back by 10 o'clock from mowing. If I'm not, well, come get me. They also tried to do less physically demanding tasks. They were doing more about machinery maintenance and equipment so they wouldn't have to do the repair work and, stick their arms and everything in places they shouldn't be. And they were doing more thoughtful planning, particularly if they, remember the respiratory thing starts going downhill at age 20. Well, these are people that are 60 and 70. The average age in our study was actually 65. So they begin to think and plan out their days so that they can conserve their energy. And I found that very, very good. That was comforting to me to know that they'd already thought about this. They'd also eased up on themselves. They said, you don't have to be in so much a hurry. It's going to be there. Just stop and rest. Fatigue is the leading cause of injury among older farmers. If they could find younger people to help them do those tasks, that's what they did. And we know that farm labor is difficult to find help these days. The other thing is they began to take vacations. And for farmers in our area who don't do a lot of grain farming, and they do the livestock farming and they do it year-round, this was really an enlightenment to them. And even taking naps. Now, who would think that farmers would go in and take naps and actually talk about it? But they said, when I get tired, I quit. And actually, one person in this study was talking about the naps, and he said, I found out I had to because I literally could not go anymore. So he just began to build nap times, a little short nap, into his workday. I think we should all do that because I think we'd all be more productive. The family members, when we talked to them about adaptations, there were some rather unsettling things. They'd actually sold part of the farm to lessen the workload and change the type of farm operation. These were not things that were done a lot, but they were mentioned. They also, though, tried to do things like keep those PTO shields on, which before when the farmers were younger, they kind of ignored those and how they step over them and get into trouble. But as we began to age, or there were aging family farmers around, this began to bubble up as one of the things we should be more proactive on. And again, this planning how we're going to distribute the task ahead of time so that people know what's expected of them and they can plan their day accordingly. The family members tried to find different tasks for the older or senior farmer that they didn't consider as risky as the others. So again, it's not the type of work you do, it's the fact that you're doing work. And that's what's important to these senior farmers. and to repair the equipment so someone else can use it. We all have equipment that, have these little quirks to them, and so I can't let anybody else use that certain tractor because you have to baby it. There's a certain way you have to start it or throttle it down or whatever. But if you fix it so everybody can use it, then you can redistribute those tasks. This communication thing was probably the biggest thing that came out of that, and they're very worried about these senior farmers. I wanted to keep him in sight. I wanted to make sure that we had a check-in time so that we know he's okay. In my own family, this communication became even more important because my dad would just show up and he couldn't hear thunder. So my brother was really worried that he was going to run over Dad someday when he was trying to get the tractors out, because Dad would just show up in the barn. So it made my brother a nervous wreck. So it was really kind of a thing we had to build in some extra communication. And also to make sure that plan A doesn't work, have plan B. And so many times plan A doesn't work. So if you've already thought about what you're going to do if the day breaks down or the season breaks down, then it relieves that stress. So we talked to the farmers about, the use of guidelines. Now, how many of us use brochures and things like that when we're trying to, make our points? And we'll just leave a brochure here. You can read this, and this will tell you what you can or cannot do. Oh, don't do that with this group of people. They don't want to be told what they can do and what they can't. So we handed out some things that were established, like the AAA has a thing on mature driving. We kind of tweaked that for tractor driving to see if they could still use their tractor. They threw it back at us, literally. There are the North American guidelines for children's agricultural tasks. We retweaked a couple of those, and it was for farming as you age. They really didn't like that because it had the word stop in there if you couldn't do certain things. So what they told us was, we're going to realize when it's time for us to quit. So they're going to do, in their minds, some type of self-assessment. I'm hoping that through some of the work that we do in AgrAbility, we can at least get them thinking about some of these things that they might not should be doing out there at certain times when disabilities begin to kick in. And to think about alternative tasks, though, that are equally valuable to the farm and to the farm work. They did say that anything that would make you stop and think might be helpful. It's just the formatting of that becomes tricky. We've come up with a way that we think is going to be helpful. We're actually doing farm theaters. We were just funded to do that for the next 4 years. So if any of you folks are interested out there in farm theater, we are taking all the stories that we've heard over the 23 years I've been doing this and soliciting even more stories and write little micro scripts, if you will, that are based on local issues for these senior farmers. The farmers themselves actually do these plays. They last about, 7 to 10 minutes apiece, and they read the scripts, and then I lead a discussion about what just happened here and has this ever happened to you. And through the discussion, they actually move their own social norms in their community. So in a pilot, one of the things that did come out was about the nap taking. So by the time we ended the night, I asked them, I said, okay, what's one thing you've learned here? And they said, it's okay to take naps, which is a really good step to take, particularly if you're a senior farmer. And the other thing is anything that we talk with them about is going to be taken more seriously if it's directed toward their risk of hurting others. They don't really care so much if they die in the field, but if they think they're going to hurt somebody else, it's going to make them sit up and listen. The family members said, but these are hard conversations to have, because when we try to have them, the older farmer becomes aggressive, being upset. And the other thing was that women in this generation, women don't tell men what to do. I've had a lot of farmers say, that guys say, oh yes they do, they try to tell us. It's called the Nag Factor, and actually that might work to a certain extent as long as it's not overdone. You have to think about the personality of the person that you're talking with. Is this a person who's been receptive to other ideas? And if not, you're going to take a different tactic. So the older farmer has to really come to the realization that a particular job, not farming work in general, but that a certain job can get done without him. There's other things that can be done. Some farmers actually do have mental blocks for changes, just like all the rest of us do. Change is not good when maybe change is good. But you have to take baby steps toward this. So from a preliminary themes that we got from talking with these farmers across the nation, here's basically the farmer said, don't tell us we can't do this anymore. And don't give us these things that tell us stop or for the assessments. Again, more concerned about hurting someone else than hurting ourselves, and they love humor. And how many times have you folks gone out to do your case thing and there's humor there, and that's really what helps you. And to be realistic, the farmers' families say, we're trying to find alternative tasks. Make sure that we use equipment that they're familiar with because they don't have to relearn things. The farmers say, we've abused our bodies. We hope that the younger ones don't do that so much. The younger ones need to be careful about telling us what to do. In other words, don't have us mowing banks on the farm. It's probably the worst thing. We have tractor rollovers. But the families also were very cognizant to say, if you take their freedom away, you'll break an older farmer's spirit just like that. So we do have this whole culture of farming. And I think the thing that got me the most was, so how did your conversation with your dad go about him giving up the keys to the tractor? And this farmer, who was in his 60s, he started crying and he said it was the hardest thing I ever had to do. So if we can be more proactive, maybe we don't have to have those kinds of conversations. So I'm hoping that maybe in the little chat box you all can, or by email, you can share with me some of your stories and your thoughts and your ideas. And I would encourage you to share those with each other, maybe not now so much as later, but to generate some thought. And you are your own pure network, so talk among each other, but include me because I find these very helpful to what we're doing. These are just some of the questions that I have asked the farm groups as I've gone along. And I'm going to wrap this up. They said 10 minutes until question and answer, so we're in good time, I think, for this. But I do want you to notice the resources here. I do have a Facebook page. I'm not very good at it, and I don't post very often, but if you send me a question, I promise you I will find some kind of answer for you. So there's the Facebook page for the agriculture.nurse on there. You already know about AgrAbility, but I always put that up there every time that I do this presentation. You probably know about AgriSafe, who sponsors wonderful, at least monthly webinars and have all kinds of resources. AgriWellness, which is run out of the Midwest, focused on behavioral health and mental health issues for farming. We do have the NIOSH Ag Centers located across the nation. We're always receptive to new ideas, new projects, or just to share information. And the National Agricultural Safety Database, you might not be aware of this one. It has recently been revamped. So you can just type that in under Google. It'll take you to it. There's all kinds of wonderful resources that are there, and they're free. I actually have one up there that's been there since I worked with high schools across the nation developing curriculum. There's a nice little 7-minute video on sound advice for farming. It demonstrates to farmers what it would sound like to them, what machinery would sound like if they did have certain levels of hearing loss. So those are just some of the things. But I'll finish this up by just saying what pretty much every farmer I've ever talked to has said to me. And as I can't imagine not farming, I'd rather die than not farm. It is who we are. Even though I'm not a farmer, my roots still run deep, and I still have a great passion for getting out and digging in the dirt. And again, what the farmers say, as long as I can climb onto a tractor, I will. If you stop, you sit still and die. So with that, I guess we're ready to, Paul, to open this up for questions, however you want to do that. And thank you all for your patience. It looks like pretty much everybody stuck with us, so good job.
Thanks very much, Deb, for that excellent presentation and all your evidence-based work there. We appreciate all the careful research you've done, and we have some questions already. If you have additional questions, please go ahead and type those into the chat box. Before we go to those, I'm going to do our 4 poll questions. So I'd like to open the first one and just get an idea of where you're from in terms of your affiliation. If you are affiliated with AgrAbility in any way, we'd appreciate you using that choice. I know several people have multiple hats that they wear. Just another couple seconds on that. One other thing I would mention, if there's more than one person at your location viewing, if you could let us know that in the chat window also, that would be helpful for our records. And also, if you're going to be attending other sessions, if you could possibly use your first and last name, that helps us match up our attendance during the presentation with the registration information that we've earlier received. So in terms of who's out there, it looks like we've got a pretty good selection of people. Of course, we expect the most from AgrAbility, but we do have people from various other categories, so that's great. Okay, our next question asks about the information that was shared today. If you found it to meet your expectations, is valuable to you, so let us know. Seconds on that. Okay, as expected, very good response on that. And I believe that's probably the highest we've ever gotten. So I think that's a reflection of the quality of our presentation today. Technology is the next question. If you could let us know how things worked for you in terms of the technology. And if you had any specific problems, if you could type those in the chat window too, that helps us to troubleshoot for those types of issues in the future. Okay. Thank you for your responses on that. Looks like people generally got along all right. And our final poll question. Based on today's session, would you attend another session in this series? Speaking of other sessions in this series, our session this afternoon at 3 o'clock is featuring Aida Balsano, our USDA NIFA representative in Washington, D.C. She's going to be talking not only about AgrAbility and future funding issues and that type of thing for our program, but she'll be touching on other possible funding sources for rural safety and health. If you are in any way associated with rural safety and health, you may want to go ahead and log into that session, even if you're not directly affiliated with AgrAbility, as there may be some opportunities that you are not aware of or would like to learn more about. So that is our final poll question. We thank you for your responses on that. And now we've got our question and answer period. Cliff, I'm not sure if you're with us or not, but I'm going to go ahead and close my camera, and Deb can come back on and activate hers and her microphone.
Okay, so it looks like we have a few questions, and it was nice to see people that I knew on there. Carla Wilhite, good morning. I haven't, but it's cold where you are. Carla had a question on here about if I thought it might be as they were injured, maybe getting, oh, I didn't share my camera. I'm sorry. There you go. Now you can see my face, I hope. Or maybe you don't want to. I wonder if part of the suicide issue is a feeling of a sense of loss of farmer identity. Oh, absolutely. I think you're right on target with that. As the illness or disability begins to interfere with what they can do, and they can't do the farm work like they used to, remember that is their self-identity. So I think when we're talking with folks through the AgrAbility project, and you're going out, listen especially for that sense of loss. And you can't replace loss, identically the way they used to do things. But I would really try to get that conversation going in a positive direction. Well, tell me about things that you are doing now, just to make them aware that they're still contributing, even though they, may be limited now. And that with your all's assistance, of course, they'll probably be able to contribute even more. So there was one question. I hope that kind of answered that. If you could share just one method of getting the word about AgrAbility out to farmers in a way they would receive it, what would it be? What farmers have told me is they would prefer to learn from each other. So I think feature stories in popular press, particular popular farm press, is the thing that really resonates with these farmers. And, you know, I don't know of any farmer that doesn't get a stack of these magazines and newsletters. So even though it's old-fashioned, I would do that for the first thing, to go to the print media. And I think also, you know, the computerized version, being able to maybe have the blog for the younger ones particularly. My brother is 70 something, and he just got his first computer. He said he would, and he's a farmer. He said he had never used that thing. He's buying all of his livestock that way. Now he's on so many things. So, you know, don't discount older farmers just because you think they're not going to be using computers. They will. But use their stories. What would you recommend to young farmers in terms of what not to do to enable them to get going? I don't know what the end of that, get grow with farming. The first thing I think is some of the things that the older farmers have told me. The older farmers said we abused our bodies. And you have to remember that the generation they came from, I mean, some of these people didn't start out even with tractors. But farmers are very competitive. You know, who can get the most stalks of tobacco, and I'm from Kentucky, who can get the most stalks of tobacco cut in one day? You know, who can hang the fastest? Who can toss the hay bales the highest and all that? It's not necessarily a good thing to do to your body. So to try to get everyone to sort of pace themselves a little bit more. And of course, I think the preventive maintenance that the older farmers are now seeing as very important is something that younger farmers tend not to do because of the cost, and to kind of get those lessons learned along the way back to the younger farmers. I'm not sure that answered the question, but if it didn't, type in another one. We'll get to it. Would you email me a list of your references cited today? I don't know who sent that, but if you'll email me personally offline, I would be happy to do that. My email is D as in Debbie, B as in boy, REED 01 at uky.edu. And I will be happy to share anything that I have. I also have a really interesting little tip sheet. It's called 10 Tips for Your Health and Safety that I could email you. So if you want that, I would be happy to send you that. It has, as I said, it's just 10 tips for farming that you can share with the farmers, plus the resources on there. Is there anything farmers can do to improve balance, like yoga? Well, now, we have two people on here, at least two, from Tennessee, and I think that there's a project going on in Tennessee right now with farmers using Tai Chi. So, and I thought that was amazing, because we think of farmers not doing things like that. So, absolutely, some of these programs would be phenomenal. But what I even tell farmers, if they don't want to go that distance for yoga or Tai Chi, is simply to make sure that they do the stretching and everything before they get up, because even that will help their balance some when they first get up, or to take a break during the day, and you know, they can hang on to the tractor tire if they need to, but just try to do some of those things. Stand on one foot while you're holding something, or things like that. Anything like that will help. What I found with farmers is the less technology or the less things they have to buy, gadgets, the better off they are. Okay, any other questions from the audience? And if not, remember that you can email me at that address, and I'll be happy to have conversations with you. If you know of someone that would maybe want to think a little bit about our theater presentations, that is a research project, but we do have funding to come to areas to do that. We are not focusing, though, on farmers with disabilities. We are focusing on farmers age 50 and above. So for that, I think that's it. Thank you.
Thanks again, Deb. Again, just an outstanding presentation. I think we can see from not only the poll results, but from some of the comments in the chat window, people really appreciated that. If you would like to view the recording of this, I've put the URL at the top. It may have been different than the one I put in the earlier slide, so this one is the correct one. I think possibly the one I gave you before was for our standard AgrAbility webinar series, and since this is our virtual national training workshop, we have a different URL for that. So I'll be leaving this information up for a few minutes. We're going to have to close the room to prepare for the next session this afternoon. So if you need any of this, please go ahead and get that. Again, thank you for joining us. Some of the other sessions, if you go to that URL, are also listed. In fact, all the rest of the sessions are described if you've not seen that yet. Again, 3 o'clock today, Eastern Time, will be our session with Ada Balsano from USDA. So we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you very much.